and get us started. We're on time. I'm only a little late on getting my text together, so that's not so bad. Hi, Phil.
Hey, Rabbi Jonathan.
Hey,
Hey,
Uncle
Bob.
Phil.
Banjo Bob.
Hey.
Hello, everyone.
All right. Well,
Bob just had a birthday last week.
Who had a birthday? Bob?
Bob. Mm-hmm.
Bob, you had a birthday?
Yes.
You turned 39?
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't look a day over 100.
It's that South Carolina sun.
And the moonshine.
And the moonshine.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to start us off with our blessing in a moment. It's nice to see so many people. And I went very public on Facebook this week, so that increased our coverage, which is wonderful. We have a bunch of people showing up for a Zoom. And our blessing as we begin to learn is Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Praised are you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe. You sanctify us with commandments, and you command us to engage in words of Torah, to participate in the business of the give and take of learning. Today, we're going to be looking at this week's Parsha, Parshat V'Shalach, famous for any number of reasons. Of course, because it has the crossing of the Sea of Reeds, it has the singing of the Song of the Sea, and any number of other things. But we're going to look at a few verses from the opening because Aviva Gottlieb-Zornberg is going to get us deep into skepticism and questions and how does God know that the Israelites are so difficult from the get-go? Hello, welcome Carol, welcome everybody. We are about to start reading some Torah together. So, and of course, as always, don't hesitate to ask me questions along the way. So for a change of pace tonight, we're going to look at a different view. That's not the view we're going to try to look at. We're going to try to look at this one. There we go. Where did it go? No, not that one. This one. There we go. All right. So this is one of the best websites you can find for finding text. It is called sefaria.org. You can see it at the top of the page. That's sefaria.org. It is a wonderful resource for learning pretty much all Jewish texts. It's kind of a Jewish library growing as on the fly. It's really wonderful. So I urge everyone to explore it at your leisure. Today, with one click on the front page of Sefaria, you can easily get to the Parsha of the week, the Torah reading of the week, and this is B'Shalach. And here it is. So B'Shalach is the first signifying word, and it's Vayhi B'Shalach Paro et ha'am v'lo nacham Elohim derech eretz Filishtim ki karov hu ki amar Elohim pen yenachem ha'am bir otam milchama v'shavu mitzrayma. So this is a very interesting opening. It says, when Pharaoh sent the people, so that's this B'Shalach. Our opening is the sending. Now when Pharaoh let the people go is not a great translation, unfortunately, but there we go. Sometimes we have good translations, sometimes less good. This I would identify as a less good. So we've got Pharaoh sending the Israelites out, the people out. Velo nacham Elohim, and God did not lead them derech eretz Filishtim. God did not lead them by way of the land of the way of the land of the Philistines. Why? Ki karov hu. Now here we're going to talk about this at some length with Professor Gottlieb Zornberg, who says quite clearly that there are at least 4 different regular readings for the word ki here, this word in Hebrew, ki. And it is usually because, and here it is not. So here it is something else. So here it's translated as although it was nearer, not because it was nearer. So God doesn't lead them by way of the land of the Philistines, because although it was nearer, it was closer. Ki amar Elohim pen yinachem, because God said, lest the people have a change of heart or turn around. It's not quite clear here exactly what it said, what it is in Hebrew. This change of heart thing is not here. It's lest there's some weird reversal thing going on in their seeing. When they see war and they return towards Egypt. So what the heck is going on here? God doesn't take the Israelites out of Egypt the easy way. Why? Well, it's closer, but they're going to encounter war. And when they encounter war, what are they going to do? The Israelites are going to turn around. They're going to head in another way. Not only that, they're going to go back to Egypt. Now, why? Who would think this? Who would think the Israelites would, having just been liberated from slavery by God's outstretched arm, by plagues, by miracles, what the heck is God thinking that God understands that the Israelites might want to turn around when they run into war? So what does God do? Vayesev Elohim et ha'am derech hamidbar yam suf v'chamushim alu v'nei Yisrael me'eretz Mitzrayim. So what does God do? God leads them roundabout. God leads them through the derech hamidbar, by way of the wilderness. And vayasov is vayasev. The opening here is wander around. God leads them as wanderers through the desert, the wilderness at the Sea of Reeds. Yam Suf, of course, is not, in fact, the Red Sea. It is the Sea of Reeds. It ends up as a mistranslation. They're nowhere near the Red Sea. That is, geographically, they're not anywhere near there. They're near a marshy water where there is some weird thing going on. Which allows the Israelites to end up with, our narrative. And so then the Israelites, alu, they get up and they go out from the land of Egypt armed to the teeth. Okay, this is a pretty strange opening. I think we would all agree. It's not what we expect. And we have a lot more, call it, insight into the Israelites' thoughts before they've even thought them, right? This is God saying something about the Israelites long before the Israelites have said anything at all. So any questions or thoughts before we continue? Because I think we're going to jump right into Aviva Gottlieb Zornberg, and we'll jump back and forth between text as we need to. Any thoughts? Questions? I saw Bobby Handel show up, which it's a thrill to see Bobby join us. So thank you for being here, Bobby.
It's a pleasure to be with you, Rabbi. I miss you.
Oh, well, I miss you too. But we are all here together. And where did they get all these arms, says Bob. Well, the Israelites leave Egypt and the Egyptians give them stuff to leave. There's this in last week's parsha, as they're taking off, the Egyptians are so happy to see them go that they give them stuff, including apparently implements of war, which is a whole nother commentary. So here we're going to look at, as we have been, our guide for this, Viva Gottlieb-Zornberg, whose commentary on this part of the Torah. She has written this wonderful book called The Particulars of Rapture, Reflections on Exodus. And we are moving into her chapter 4, because this is the fourth parsha of Exodus, the Shalach, Song Line Through the Wilderness, which is a romantic titling for this. But really what she's looking at, what we're looking at, is this opening bit, what? The word what? Subversion in the wilderness. So for those of you who've read Aviva Gottlieb-Zornberg with me before, please ask questions. She is not easy reading, but she is worth, as a professor, she is so worth getting into. So she starts off, preventing subversive thoughts. A remarkable feature of the liberation experience is the negative tonality that informs the narrative. At the moment of crossing the border, we might have imagined high elation, the intoxication of freedom. In so many literary accounts of breaking across borders to freedom, even in dangerous situations, a giddy, symbolic joy is the main response to arriving on the other side, right? Think of it. When we get free, we have a party when we get out of wherever we are. That's what we do. We get out, we cheer, we go nuts, we have a great time. Not here, though. Something else is going on. So she starts with this very basic question. In the Exodus narrative, however, we find a spate of negative statements. On the one hand, there is the baking of the matzah, the unleavened bread, for it had not risen, for they were driven out of Egypt and could not delay. Moreover, even provisions for the journey they did not prepare for themselves. So this is in last week's Torah reading, right? The bread didn't rise, they couldn't delay. Not that they had to hurry, but the opposite, they couldn't tarry, right? And so there's a lot of negativity going on here. And they didn't prepare themselves. And furthermore, as we read just now, God did not lead them by way of the land of the Philistines because it was close, for God said, lest the people change their minds when they see battle and return to Egypt. So we've got this whole setup. The whole setup, we expect celebration at Exodus. We expect throwing up of our hands, enjoyment, a party. We brought all this stuff out with us. Let's have a feast. But that doesn't happen. And think about the way we celebrate the festival of Passover to this day. A Passover Seder may be joyous, but it is not, a raucous party. If you want to look for a raucous party in Judaism, you go to a different holiday. You go to Purim, or you go to Simchat Torah. Passover is a very different type of holiday than that. Yes, many of us might get a little inebriated after 4 cups of wine over the Passover Seder, but we're not strictly sitting there toasting one another and giving cheers. It's a study holiday. It's a tell the story to our children and grandchildren holiday. It's not a, laugh out loud, have a party holiday. So we have a little oddness going on here. Any thoughts or questions before we move on? Okay. The first of these negative descriptions, the one that of the matzah and stuff, Professor Gottlieb-Zornberg will take up later. The second description, however, of God's choice of the travel route for the liberated people, or rather of the road not taken of the rejected itinerary, is given prominence by being placed at the beginning of the Parsha. To describe God's thinking process, as it were, and to reveal the rejected alternatives, together with an opaque rationalization for the chosen route, is certainly an unusual narrative strategy. Okay, what she's saying here in this very interesting and complicated sentence, right, is that we wouldn't tell a story this way normally. Here, we would expect maybe an account of how awesome the miracles have been, right? We could almost imagine a zooming in onto the account of the people, right? We could imagine an evening news narrative. Instead of talking to the mayor or the governor or the president about the great thing that's happening, we zoom in and we talk to a person on the street and we say, how does it feel to be liberated? But no, we're not talking about that. Here we have the omniscient narrator, God saying, it's not going to work if I take them the normal way. I'm going to take them the difficult route. Because if I take them the normal route, they're just going to get scared and they're going to run back to slavery. That's like, and what Professor Gottlieb Zornberg is saying is that that's a weird choice for telling a story. It's not how we would expect the story to be told. Or as she says, it's an unusual narrative strategy. For what purpose are we told of the road not taken? And how are we to understand God's explanation of God's choice? So Rashi, our medieval commentator, has a comment that seems to clarify the issue. Because it was close, and therefore it was easy to return to Egypt by the same road. When they seen battle, if they had traveled by the direct route, they would have returned to Egypt. If even God had led them around by an indirect route, me'ukam, a crooked or zigzag road, they said, let us appoint a leader and return to Egypt, right? How much more so if God had taken them by the direct route, Peshuta, a simple, predictable route. So here, this bit of Rashi, right? So this is the way Rashi works. Rashi takes a quote, right? So here's a quote from our Torah reading, because it was close, and then offers a comment on it, right? So he says, because it was close, that means, and therefore it was easy to return. And then he says, when they see battle, right? So this is again a quote directly from this from the Parsha. If they had gone by the direct route, they would have returned to Egypt. Because why? We know in the book of Numbers. Now, what happens in the book of Numbers when they say, let us appoint a leader and return to Egypt, right? This quote here. What's this quote? This is the quote when the Israelites sent out scouts, right? And they come back from the land of Israel, and what do they see? They see that there are giants and they can't conquer it, and only Caleb and Joshua, two of the scouts, say good things about where they're going. So what do they say at that point? Let us appoint a leader and return to Egypt. So remember, Rashi is reading Torah from the perspective of all of Jewish literature. He gets to say, I know what's going to happen, so I'm going to use this as a proof text. If they'd gone the straight route, they definitely would have returned to Egypt. Because how do we know this? All the more so we know this because they went by the crooked route, the zigzag route, and they still wanted to return. Later on, when it gets hard, they say, let's go back. So this is Rashi's explanation. And here, lest they change their minds, which is another quote from our verse, they will think a thought about the fact that they have left Egypt, and they will set their minds on returning. Look at this idea here. Professor Gottlieb Zornberg is going to talk us through this quite a lot. God is creating a plan to help the Israelites think better. If I take them by the straight route, they're going to have unhelpful thoughts. So instead, I'm going to take them by the zigzag route. God is helping the Israelites think their way through. Now, knowing what we know about what's happened up until this point in the story, the Israelites haven't exactly been enthusiastic participants in this whole process, right? It took Moses a long time to convince the Israelites to get out of Egypt. And now that they've gotten out, they still don't seem to be so thrilled. And God seems to have learned a lot about how they think. So here is Professor Gottlieb Zornberg explaining Rashi, right? She says, Rashi explains, the logic of God's thinking is about the people's desire to return to Egypt. If the journey back is too easy, direct or straight, they'll think the forbidden desire and they're going to act upon it. So God leads them by a crooked route, hoping that the complication will prevent their having such subversive thoughts. By being admitted into God's thought process, the reader learns one essential fact, the central importance of the people's desire to return to Egypt, even in the first elation of freedom. Now, this is a very Jewish thing. The Jewish thing is an understanding that situations and thoughts are connected. Our thoughts are cultivated by the situation that we're in and ourselves, and we can work on them. In fact, one can look at God's teaching here as a model for trying to set ourselves up for success, not for failure. Think about it this way. If I want to lose weight, or if I want to get to sleep earlier, or if I want to set up any number of good habits, if I want to be more positive in the day, part of what I'm going to do is not just tell myself, don't eat sweets. I'm going to buy fewer sweets to keep in the house. If I want to go to bed earlier, I'm not just going to tell myself, go to bed earlier. I'm going to, I don't know, set myself a timer or an alarm in the evening and obey the alarm that says it's time to go to bed no matter what I'm doing. If I want to be grateful in the morning, I can follow the Jewish teaching that says first thing I should say in the morning is modim moda ani, I am grateful. However we do this, what God is setting here is a model. The mindset of the Israelites needs help. They are troubled. They are having difficulty. So instead of saying, okay, let's make the test harder, let's make their difficulty more difficult, God says, let's give them less temptation to do badly. And think about this. We often are so determined to think, I can think my way through this. I can tough my way through this. If only I can toughen up my thoughts, my heart, my emotions, harden my heart to this situation, to use the biblical language, then I can make it through. And God is saying, you know what? Let's understand who we are. Let's understand that we may not be ready for the toughest of trials. Let's give the Israelites a fighting chance to not turn around and abandon this journey. All right. Any thoughts? Okay. Viva Gottlieb Zornberg has all of us mystified. Yeah, Bob, you wanted to say something?
Not yet, Rabbi. I'm working on it.
Okay. So Professor Gottlieb Zornberg continues, the opposition of the road not taken, the straight road, to the route chosen, the crooked route, carries its own paradoxical resonance. Obviously, the straight road is preferable to the crooked, strategically, physically, and ethically. Indeed, the metaphorical use of these expressions, the straight and crooked paths, is commonplace in ethical writings. We have it in Hebrew. Yashar, the word straight, means ethical and upright. To be straight is, so here, this is very strange. We would expect God, the teacher of morals and integrity, to take us by the straight path, to model straightness, as it were. But instead, God says, no, the crooked path for us. Yet here, God makes a point, the Torah makes a point of God's not taking the obvious route. Instead, a dubious, unmarked route is chosen for reasons that are related to a repressed desire. So far, we have had no evidence of such desire. The repressed desire, of course, is the desire to return to Egypt. It is the omniscient God who first speaks of it, as though it were self-evident. Through this opening speech at the moment of redemption, we understand that the Israelites, even at this moment, are ambivalent about the movement to freedom. Think about that. Think about it in our own lives. To take the next step to a better place is often risky. And the Israelites have been reluctant from the get-go. They do not know anything but slavery in Egypt. And we know this in our own lives because we know there are those of us who are comfortable going to a new place and those of us who are less comfortable doing that. I am a weirdo. I have a tendency to drive a different path to a place more often than not if I have the opportunity, right? If I'm in a hurry, of course, I'm going to drive the path that I think is quickest. But if I have an opportunity, if I have enough time, I'll probably explore a different route. But that's not normal. Most of us tend to be seekers of comfort. The Israelites, they don't know what's going to happen to them in the desert. They're concerned. They're worried. And so God already knows that the Israelites are uninterested. They are worried. They are reluctant. They are, as we call them over and over again in the Torah, a stiff-necked people. And they're ambivalent about freedom. There are potential thoughts, Professor Gottlieb Zornberg continues, about the Exodus that they are primed to think. As a proof of this, Rashi points to the later moments of regression, when the people explicitly plan to return to Egypt, even with the practical handicap of God's strategy, their circuitous zigzag route. So Rashi's argument is a classic logical argument. This is a kal v'chomer argument, from a simple to a hard. If, even having taken the difficult route, the Israelites eventually want to go back, how much more so, kal v'chomer, from the easy to the hard, to the substantive, from the light to the substantial, would they have tried to turn around had they gone the straight route? In other words, if they had gone the straight route, it would have taken them no time to try to turn around. On this reading, we perceive the strength of God's resolve that the people should not think thoughts, should not return to Egypt. But the problem, of course, is that in spite of all God's precautions, the people do think those thoughts, not just in the case of the narrative of the spies, which Rashi quotes, but several times before that culminating narrative. Indeed, in this very parsha, before we have time to draw breath, we hear the people expressing such thoughts several times. God then is represented as changing their itinerary in order to prevent what in fact happens. So here's the problem. It doesn't work. God is hoping. Now, our friend John Costner, who was here last time, asked this question about where is God's all-knowingness, all-powerfulness, God's universal absolute rightness in this? And of course, that's not the God of the Torah. That's a later idea of God. This is a God who seems to think that God knows everything and then is proven that God does not. It's pretty strange, right? We expect the setup here is God knows that the Israelites are going to have doubts. Therefore, God chooses a different route. Except the Israelites still have doubts. God knows the Israelites well enough to anticipate this and try to avoid it, and it doesn't work anyway. The Israelites continue to confound God. Here, this is the inverse of, the famous Yiddish saying, or Einstein saying, right? Man plans, God laughs. Actually, it's Yiddish. And here, humans lay plans, God laughs. Here, God plans, and the humans laugh. We get into God's thinking, and God's thinking is, I got it. I'm going to work it out. I'm going to anticipate their difficulties, and I'm going to get ahead of them. And the Israelites ignore it. Say, you think you know us. Forget it. All right. We have a quote here, a chat here. Is this you, Bob? Maybe that was because the Israelites thought they would be taken for a ride, so to speak. So here is the question, right? The Israelites are constantly wondering whether or not God is on the level, as you said, right? And they doubt every step of the way. So Gur Arya raises this problem. Who is this person? This is not a person, Gur Arya. Gur Arya is a text. It is the textual commentary on Rashi's commentary, written by a very famous rabbi, Rabbi Judah Loew of Prague. Now, Rabbi Judah Loew is known as the Maharal, and is very famous for his educational innovations in the 1500s, but he's more famous for the story of the golem. So he is the rabbi who supposedly makes the golem to save the Jews of Prague, but this is from a very famous piece of his. So Gur Arya raises this problem and in essence makes the following suggestion. God's concern is that if the people do in fact think such thoughts, they will surely act on them and try to return to Egypt. What God aims to prevent is the ease of such a return. God cannot prevent them from thinking thoughts. God can make it harder for them to act on them. So Rashi's commentary leads us into a problem that God doesn't seem to get what's going to happen next. Gur Arya, on the other hand, says, no, God knows what's going to happen next. However, God knows that thinking the thoughts is going to happen no matter what. But if the thoughts have an easy way to be acted on, then the Israelites will not just think them, they will return. And what we see is instead the idea that what God has done is prevent the thinking from being almost acted upon until all the way into the book of Numbers. So despite all the kvetching and complaining, the Israelites are thinking, but they don't really revolt and try to go back until the book of Numbers. So God delays the actual fleeing back, which is interesting because here we see God continuing to try to get the Israelites to do things without forcing them. Again, God is setting up the situation for them to maybe not fail so badly or succeed slightly, as opposed to making it happen. God doesn't muck around with the Israelites' hearts the way God does with Pharaoh's heart, which is very interesting. So God then sees redemption in a mirror mode, as it were. The way out is also potentially the way back. And the people become players in a drama of burned bridges. The fact that they cannot easily return does not, however, prevent them from thinking thoughts. The words for these thoughts are scattered throughout this parsha in episodes of fear and anxiety in which the people's language about the fact that they have left Egypt tells of radical doubt. It is not simply that they cry out in fright at the sight of the pursuing Egyptians. It is the sarcasm of the words they use, a sarcasm about God's intentions, about God's relationship with them, and about the meaning of this exodus. So here is a quote from later on in the parsha from Exodus chapter 14, 11, 12. If you want to see what that looks like in the text, we can jump to it because it's here. This jumping back and forth allows us to look at the Hebrew. So this is a wonderful little piece here And they said to Moses, Vayomru el Moshe, Hamibli ein kivarim b'mitzrayim lakach tanu lamut b'midbar ma zot asita lanu lahotzianu mimitzrayim. So you wonder how the Bible could be characterized, how the Torah could be characterized as sarcastic. Well, this is pretty clearly sarcastic, right? You can see the eye roll, right? They say to Moses, was it for want of graves? Literally, a double negative here. Were there without no graves in Egypt? Did they not have enough graves in Egypt that you've taken us to die in the desert? What is this that you are doing to us to bring us out of Egypt? And then it continues, isn't this the thing which we spoke to you about in Egypt? They more saying, Hadal mimenu v'ne'avda et mitzrayim ki tov lanu avod et mitzrayim mimutenu bamibar. Isn't this the thing we said? Let us work for the Egyptians because it's better. It's tov. It's good for us to work for the Egyptians, to serve the Egyptians rather than dying in the wilderness. Think of this. Here we are. They've just been taken out of slavery. And what do they say? You brought us out here to die? Did they not have enough place to bury us in Egypt? What kind of God are you? And on top of that, we said this to you. It's easy. It would have been easier for us to be slaves and oppressed by the Egyptians than to die out here in the wilderness. Talk about a hard crowd, right? Or in my mother's words, everyone's a critic. So that takes us back to Aviva Gottlieb Zornberg, because she quotes those two verses, and she tells us the thing that I was emphasizing there was the word tov, the word good. The radical nature of their doubt is revealed perhaps most abrasively in their use of the word good to describe Egyptian slavery, and to embed it in a fatalistic view of the narrative, which, already hardly begun, is to end in the desert sands. Their thought represents a serious attempt to make sense of events. When they say, for instance, is this not the very thing we told you in Egypt? We wonder, when did they ever say this? And this is the really funny part, right? They never said this before. What made they think they were going to die, says Bob. No water, no food, no cell phones? Yes, all of the above, right? There are lots of moments of complaint. So just so that we are clear which moment of complaint they're looking at here when they say that. Let's jump back to the text so you see it in context, right? This is the quote that Professor Gottlieb Zornberg brought us. This is as Pharaoh drew near. Ufaro hikriv. This is before the crossing of the Sea of Reeds, right? So they are at the Sea of Reeds. They've stopped and they have been overtaken, right, by the Egyptians, and they haven't even gotten there, right? The Israelites just caught sight of the Egyptians advancing upon them, and greatly frightened, they cried out. This is at the very beginning, Bob. This is not they're thirsty, they're hungry, how come we don't have meat? This is not, we're not there yet. This is at the very beginning when they haven't even gotten to the Sea of Reeds. They are total kfekshas. Everybody know the word kfeksh? To kfeksh is to complain in Yiddish. Its opposite is to kvel, which is to laud and celebrate. both starting with the very Yiddish consonant KV. So here we are. Hey, John.
You know, I've been here all this time. I just didn't get my settings right. I have some
Okay.
questions, but I'll wait for an appropriate time.
No, start now because it's going to ask now.
Okay, well, it may be the term stiff-necked may be part of a more informed vernacular, but I've never heard it before. And I was just wondering how you would describe it, because it was used in conjunction with some other words that I wouldn't associate with a stiff neck.
Okay, so stiff-necked is how the Israelites are described in Hebrew many, many times, as if their necks are literally hardened, as if they refuse to turn and see any other perspective than their own. It is a very physical description of their nature. It's not being used here, but it's used over and over again, that Moses accuses them of being a stiff-necked people, and it's a pretty literal translation out of the Hebrew.
Okay, so it's a description of a deficiency of the lateral motion of the neck in looking from side to side, instead just insisting on looking only forward. Is that
Maybe.
do it? Okay, how did I get it wrong? This is interesting to me.
You and I are in the same boat as trying to figure out what an ancient language is saying.
Oh, okay, very good.
We don't have somebody saying in biblical Hebrew, this phrase stiff-necked, this is what we mean by it. We just have stiff-necked as an accusation. This is what the Israelites are called, and you get to decide what you think it means. Yeah, Noreen, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, it seems to me a very logical thing to be upset about where they were. They didn't really know Moses all that well. They didn't know God. It had to be very frightening. God does not seem to be angry at them. We call them kvetches and we blame them. But I really think it was very plausible for them to act that way. And
Thank you so much, Noreen. You are absolutely right. We need to have the argument on behalf of the Israelites here.
yeah.
I agree 100% with you. The Israelites are out of their element.
They're scared.
They're terrified. They've just lived through all of these plagues.
Mm-hmm.
And God is strange to them. Moses is strange to them. Aaron is a local leader, but they don't know Moses. Moses grew up in Pharaoh's household, so he speaks Egyptian better than he speaks Hebrew. He spent the last 40 years in the desert of Midian with a Midianite family among them, speaking yet another language. One wonders when Moses says to God at the burning bush, I am, of uncircumcised lips, and we talked about whatever that means, or I am of speech deficient in some way, shape, or form. Maybe Moses is just saying, I don't speak the language of the prophets. I don't know what it is to be, a God speaker on your behalf. So yeah, I think some sympathy for the Israelites is justified.
May I, Noreen,
Please.
are you done?
Yeah. Go.
Okay, so I think Noreen's point was very well taken. Also, it seemed back when I was muted by my mute, you were talking about how the Israelis seem to be complaining directly to God when in fact they were addressing Moses. So was that my mistaken interpretation, or do you see God as such, do you see Moses as such an efficient and respected proxy for God that it's as if they were addressing God in their complaints to Moses? Was that your intention?
Yes and
was
no.
that confused? Okay.
No, you're right on there. They have no way to complain to God except via Moses. And
Oh,
and later on, at Mount Sinai, they go so far as to say, Moses, you talk to God. We are too terrified of God's presence to talk to God. That
so he was the sole interlocutor. I mean,
yes,
they were not able to turn their stiff necks to the sky and fetch directly to the Almighty.
that's not to say that God.
It's another surprise for me.
That's not to say that God doesn't often hear their complaints directly, right? God hears everything, but God speaks to them via Moses.
Okay.
Or via Aaron sometimes. But Aaron is very quiet in comparison to Moses, which is funny because, of course, Moses says he's not a good speaker, and therefore God says, don't worry, Aaron will do the speaking for you, and that never happens either. Right? We don't really hear Aaron speaking on Moses's behalf. So we're going to look at this question here. When they say, for instance, is not this not the very thing we told you in Egypt? We wonder, when did they ever say this? There's no record of such a protest in earlier chapters, right? We don't have the Israelites saying, we'd rather stay. We may deduce the missing passage out of silence, and she cites a whole bunch of places where it could have taken place, perhaps in chapter 4 or chapter 5 or chapter 6. In this case, their fear harks back to Moses' complaints, which we noticed in the previous chapter, that the people would not believe his message. We talked about this last week, right? This idea, or maybe the week before last, that Moses encounters over and over again sort of the resistance of being listened to, that no one will hear Moses. No one will hear the Israelites, and no one will hear God, and no one will hear Pharaoh. There's a lot of not listening going on. The people's sarcasm at the sea then seems to justify Moses's earlier skepticism about them. Alternatively, however, we may detect here a fabrication, a retroactive interpretation of the past, aligning it with the perceptions of the present. In other words, this is a moment of serious thinking, one in which the Israelites find it all too plausible that they have been seduced from a place of relative security to a place of sure death. And this, Adina and Noreen, you have brought, because Adina talked in the chat, Noreen, about how she agrees with you, that that there is a justifiable doubt here. Where are they going? How are they going to get there? They're headed into the wilderness. Midbar is not desert, it's the wilderness. It's the place where terrible things happen. There are demons there. So they reread their own story, the Israelites, as a tragedy, a story about death. Is it because there were no graves? What is this that you have done to us? Is the radical question of meaning. Is this a story of redemption or of diabolical hatred, or even the most unnerving possibility of all, of the personal megalomania of Moses? In this last case, the people's question is addressed most personally to Moses. You brought us to die. What have you done to us, taking us out of Egypt? So this, again, puts us into the mindset of the people who Moses has come to them from nowhere. Who is this crazy man who brings down miracles and plagues and terrors from the sky, who turns rivers to blood and brings down locusts and makes us paint blood on our doors so that our firstborn don't die? Who is this guy? And now he's gotten us kicked out of Egypt. So the stiff-necked part, John, to swing us back there, is that we are a skeptical people. The Israelites who became the Jews, who became us today, I like to categorize us as the show me people, right? You know, we have a show me state here in the United States called, right? Missouri is the show me state. Sorry, Missouri, not Missouri. Which we should all learn how to pronounce appropriately, because after all, Kansas City is yet again in the Super Bowl. But in any event, We are the show me people. We're like, no. Thank you. You got us here so far. But what's going to happen tomorrow and the next day and the day after? And maybe there's an interesting turnaround here, that by taking the Israelites the crooked way, God has in fact argued against God's self. God has, instead of showing the Israelites God's wisdom and picking an easy route, God has in fact shown the Israelites that there's a lot of mystery going on, and this is not what a trustworthy person would do. Let's go back to, you get in a car with somebody and you're going somewhere that you both know how to get to, and that person sets off in the opposite direction of where you're headed. Or takes a back road when you know you could be taking a major road, and isn't talking to you about it at all, right? It snowed a little here in Buffalo today, surprising at the end of January that we have a little snow. I mean, truly a little snow. And the roads were a mess because we've had so little snow that nobody knows what to do with it anymore, right? The plow drivers don't even remember what it's like to work. So Ginny and I took one route out to a place we were driving, and we took a different route back. But I turned to her and I said, so on the way back, we shouldn't go that way. We should go this way because that way was a mess, and maybe this way will be better, right? The nice thing to do when we're traveling together and one person is in charge and the other person is a passenger is to say, hey, we're doing this together. What do you think? But God doesn't do that. And this goes back to Noreen and Adina's question here is God trustworthy? Is God not terrifying? Is God a model of behavior here, or a caution, a negative model, a teaching of what not to do? And the Israelites are in the same boat. Are the Israelites, stiff-necked and difficult and skeptical and sarcastic, and are they dragging their feet for no good reason? Or are they reasonably worried?
If I may, Rabbi?
Yeah.
If God were to be less dogmatic, I think might be less of a dictator. I mean, we all know about Jews that if there were 2,000 Israelites, there were 3,000 opinions, right? And so,
right, and here we're talking hundreds of thousands. Yes.
Well, that is okay. So, yeah, we'll extrapolate. But if he didn't seize control of the situation and instead decided or attempted to take a consensus, they may never have made it anywhere. Could that possibly be a
well? There's no doubt that had the Israelites had a democracy at this point, they wouldn't have made it one step together. There's no doubt. And Bob asks, how did the Israelites know anything about one route or the other? Not only were they stiff-necked, but they were most likely not very educated on geography. It's true. However, they go a very different route. The straight route to Israel would have been the coastal route. And that's clear. You head north up the Nile, and then you take a right when you hit the Mediterranean. And they were not doing that. So Moses promises the frightened people trapped between the Egyptians and the sea that they will never see Egyptians the same way again. And indeed, after the miraculous events of that night and morning, the people do see differently. Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the shore of the sea. And when Israel saw the great hand that God had wielded against the Egyptians, the people feared God. They had faith in God and God's servant Moses. The difference is etched against a background of similarity. Once again, it seems, vision leads to fear. Indeed, the two words form an assonance, a similar hearing in Hebrew, vayar and vayireu. Before the Israelites lifted up their eyes and saw Egypt traveling after them, they were afraid and cried out to God. Now they see Egypt dead, a very different vision, and fear God. What they see and what they fear has changed, but is the experience of fear changed? Is this new fear of God different from the primary fear of death? And this is a key element to one of the reasons why biblical language is so bad in English. We translate from the Bible a phrase, one who fears God, into this idea of God-fearing, be a God-fearing person. But I think this is better translated, and Aviva Gottlieb Zornberg, I think, originally gave these talks in Hebrew, I'm not sure, but it's better translated as awe. To be in awe of God. To see deeply to a point where the overlap between fear and wonder is pretty close. Because when we see deeply into the world, we should feel a certain degree of awe and wonder. I mean, the miraculousness of what we are accustomed to on an everyday basis is we are in a constant state of ignoring all the wondrous things around us. Merely the fact that I'm looking into a camera embedded into the shell of my laptop and able to lead a learning for all of you across the ether is filled with so many layers of miracles. And I'm not an uneducated person, but I couldn't tell you the first thing about how that flat little camera works. It's pretty great. I do know that the internet is not a series of tubes, as one senator said a couple of years ago, but nonetheless, it's still pretty amazing. And if we drop ourselves into the minds of the Israelites, are they fearing God and fearing death? Are they in awe of God? Have they moved over from fear of God who brings death to wonder in God that saves them? And how close is that? How close is it to the deity who wipes out our enemies and the deity who saves us, to the deity who might also wipe us out? The power over life and death is not just power over life and death of our enemies, it's power of life and death over everyone. And so this is an interesting shift. And what is their seeing revealing? So as we head towards this week of what is normally identified as a parsha, a Torah reading of celebration, right? This is the week of Song of the Sea, where one of our prayers, Mi Chamocha, comes from. It's in this reading. Who is like you, O God, among all the other gods? Not the sarcastic question, but the question that cannot be answered, the rhetorical question that says there is no one like you, God. Because as the Israelites reach the other end, the other side of the Sea of Reeds, they do erupt in song, a song that we sing if we go to prayer services every day. And what do we do with liberation? And do we understand that redemption, that liberation is also on this fine line between something to celebrate and something to be cautious of? And truly what we see in the Torah is the Israelites are in a very transitional moment throughout the entirety of the rest of this journey. The big transitional liminal moment right now is the Israelites have left slavery and they are subordinate to God, but they don't know the terms of their relationship yet. So they are liberated from slavery in order to be free, not to worship God, but to engage in relationship, to be bound in covenant with God, to engage in a back and forth between responsibilities and freedoms. That back and forth is the fundamental functioning of healthy life. I had to sit with our 7-year-old this afternoon and console her on having to go back to school tomorrow. She's had a cold, and we kept her out of school because we're trying to be responsible parents. And we divided up all of our lives into the interplay between the stuff we do that we love and the stuff that we do that we can like, but is part of our responsibility. And we don't get to love everything we do because it's our responsibility. But they have to happen. Judaism is about that interplay. We cannot have 7 days of Sabbath. We have to have 6 days of doing and 1 day of reflecting. And here we are given freedom, taken out from slavery for the sake of something. But that something is terrifying. Freedom to interact with a God who has power of life and death over us is terrifying, is risky, is random, is strange. And to a certain extent, we are all worried about that. Think about how our lives have become so much more tenuous in the last year. Our sense of what's reliable. And the question is, has it changed, or are we just seeing more clearly? Was our sense of the dependable before on account of actual dependability, or was it an illusion? And has the pandemic and everything else that's gone on in the last, since March, for most of us, just dispelled the illusion, made it clear that our sense of what was dependable was not so dependable? And is that merely a shift in vision? Any questions, comments, thoughts?
I like it when you go off text, Rabbi. There's a lot of value in that.
Well, so what I am hoping this will open us all up to is that there is no going off text without starting on text. And that the Jewish interplay is not that I have a great idea and therefore everybody should listen to me, but Judaism has a discussion that's a history of great ideas. And I'm going to riff off that great idea, and I'm going to digest, re-inject, and bring a whole bunch of it forward. Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz of blessed memory, who was one of the greatest teachers of the last 100 years, died last year. Terrible loss. I got to learn with him in person once. And he said one of the fundamental differences between Jewish learning and Western learning was if we go to our teacher and we're writing a paper and it's in a Western academic setting, and the teacher says, "I'm sorry, what you've come up with has already been written about. So-and-so already did this." Then you have to start over again. However, if you go to your Jewish teacher and you say, "I came up with this great idea," and the Jewish teacher says, "Oh, you know what? You know who also came up with that great idea? Rashi did, or Hillel did, or Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai did." Instead of saying, "No, it's not a good idea because somebody else thought it," then our Jewish teacher is saying, "You're on the right track. You have independently come to a teaching that one of our great teachers also taught. That's good." This means we're in conversation over the generations. Our ideas, some of them are going to be good, some of them are going to be bad, but we've been talking about them for a long time. So when we go off text, what we are doing is we're taking the text as inspiration to come up with something else. So Bob said, "I understand there was a trepidation vis-a-vis Moses and God, but freedom had to be better than being whipped, etc., every day in Egypt." Well, yes and no. Freedom is terrifying, Bob. If I get up in the morning and I don't have my to-do list, what am I to do? And my to-do list is almost as much of a taskmaster as the Egyptian slave masters ever could have been. The Israelites are not given an itinerary. They're not given a plan. They don't know where they're going. Think about the difference between heading in a direction, go back to we get into our cars and we start going somewhere. If we know where we're headed, if we drive it every day or every week or every month, it's not that big a deal. There's very little trepidation. If we're going someplace we've never gone before, though, or more importantly, we're taking a route that we've never taken from one place to another place, we have no idea how long it's going to take. We don't know the landmarks. We don't know anything. A trip like that usually feels like it's longer because we're paying so much more close attention to everything around us. We're so maybe worried, maybe concerned, maybe excited, but there's a different level going on. And the Israelites, they are not given a guidebook. They are thrown into the deep end, literally, of the Sea of Reeds, and have to trust that God's not going to drop those walls of water on them. And they get through, and they sing, and they celebrate, and they still are worried. And we are the people who came out of that worry, that skepticism, that stiff-neckedness also turned into a, hey, show me something. Let's talk about it. Let's figure it out together. And that's our project here. So with that, I hope all of you will continue to join us on this project, on this journey. I'm so thrilled that you found us. I hope some of you found us through My Jewish Learning or through the website opendoorjudaism.org or through Facebook or any other ways. If you have anything that you'd like me to teach or discuss, let me know. Adina just said, thank you, I'll see you tomorrow. Tomorrow at noon, we'll be discussing Maimonides. So I hope you'll join us then. Thursday at noon, we have a, thank you, Julia. Thank you, Mark. It's great to, thank you all for showing up this evening. It's wonderful to have such a lovely group. On Thursday at noon, I have a every other week conversation with Reverend Denise Walden, who is an African-American minister and organizer here in Buffalo. Our topic will be, what next on anti-racism now that we have moved into a new presidency, a new House and Senate, and what's going to happen next? How do we continue to push our leaders to push against racism? So that's a different type of conversation. So in any event, I hope all of you have a wonderful evening. Thank you for staying up late with me. For those of you who are on the East Coast, and John and Hawaii, we wish you a good dinner time.
Thank you.
Bye.
Jonathan.
Rabbi,
Bye,
is there a schedule where all of these sessions are scheduled?
I will post the link right in the chat.
Thanks.
Of course. My job is to make it easy.
I don't know about that. I'm going to question that.
Oh, you're going to push back on whether or not my job is to make it easy? God, you
Ask you a question and you go, well, what do you think?
Well, it depends on whether it's a point of clarification or a point of opinion, right?
I guess so. What do you think?
Well, when it's a point of clarification, I usually can offer an opinion.
I have to mute during the whole thing because I giggle through your, you're laughing.
Right.
No, I'm laughing too.
There's the link to our events. Hi, Alana. Nice to see you. Everybody turns on their video now at the end.
Hey, Rabbi?
Yes.
You know that you and I met 33 years ago?
33 years ago today?
Not today.
No, 33. I know it was.
That's quite a stretch of time.
Summer of 1986. Yes, I remember.
Yeah.
That's
yeah,
more.
I just realized that. That was a thrill.
That's 35 years ago.
Oh, well, I thought it was 80. I thought it was 87, but anyway, and yes, now but we haven't reached the summer of 2021. But correct my math at your leisure. I'm still in the right ballpark.
You are in the right ballpark. Needless to say, it was during the Reagan administration, one way or another.
It was a Cold War. Yeah.
We were cycling through Northwest Washington and the Canadian Rockies, where for those of you who have never been to Mount Baker National Wilderness, we were there on July 4th weekend in 1986, and it snowed.
Wow.
Yes, and we were not terribly happy about that.
No, it's amazing though. It's one of those things where looking back on it, I get to laugh and be happy about it. But at that moment, no, we were definitely a stiff-necked fetching group when we woke up in the morning in our tents on the top of Mount Baker National Wilderness, and there was snow on the ground.
Do you remember Sean chanting, "Cold, wet, miserable"?
Yes, I do remember that. That's impressive. All right, well, thank you, everybody. Please check out the website. Send me comments. I send out a weekly email, so feel free to sign up for the email, which has all events on it. This is an experiment, Open Torah Judaism, right? It's meant to be sort of this ongoing conversation about how do we use Judaism to make our lives better.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, everybody. Really nice to see everybody.